Welcome back. Today we are going to talk about the Raptgo Hook-X HBB version. So I do feel like I'm a little late to the Raptgo Hook-X party. I think a lot of you bought it, the original, and loved it. And after listening to this one for about 2 minutes, you sort of understand exactly why people really liked it. Because it has a signature that's more like a traditional 1DD or hybrid versus some of the planar sets that came out around the same time. Is much more, maybe traditional sounding than timeless, and I think that is very appealing. Plus, it has a lot of bass to it. Again, very appealing. So I understood it immediately after picking it up. Like, wow, okay, this is why people really like this set. And I think the HBB version just gave you a little more of what you liked in the original, and he made some tuning tweaks to it. Like, I think he just added some bass to it. I'm not sure exactly what other tweaks he made to it, but I think it's reasonably close to the original. Probably just tweaked a little bit more for his library, but the set itself looks very similar to the original, but this one is in blue, and it does feature the open back again and the piezo on the inside. These are the more open style tips, and I'll show you the other tips in a second. And this is the blue and black modular cable, which is actually quite nice. So nice accessories, nice case. This is the tip case, so you actually do get an assortment, 2 sets of full tips. So that's the blue, more open set, and that's the darker, blacker version, which is slightly smaller. So I didn't think you really needed some tips that emphasize the bass a little more. I think the open ones actually sound fine, and they give you a little more mids. I thought it was nice to include both, but I definitely stuck with the more open set. This is the box as well. And not too much interesting on the box. But again, nice set of accessories, nice case, nice tips. I think all around just kind of a nice package, just like the original. I don't think anything changed except the cable color changed, I believe. So here's the graph, and we're not going to delve too into it. Like I said, with most planar graphs, these are very deceptive. And there isn't really too many planar graphs where you could really point to exactly what's really going on. They sort of... I like talking about them relatively general, but, as far as specifics, I wouldn't want to leave you with the impression that Hook-X is, a lot brighter than Timeless, because it really doesn't come off that way. I do think they increased the bass a little bit, and it's probably a little bassier than Timeless, but this bit that looks like the treble is significantly more than Timeless, I think is very misleading, and I think this one has the potential to go above timeless levels like that, but generally with the bass, this actually sounds like it's probably just below or at timeless. I think it's very deceptive to look at this graph and try to glean any info from it, so that's why I don't want to talk about it. But I figured I'd show it because it does follow kind of a reasonably close timeless pattern, but I do think the two sets sound quite different. And as I said, Hook-X is more of a traditional sounding one dynamic driver or your favorite hybrid, and we'll kind of get into that in a second. So as I said right at the beginning, kind of differentiators with this guy that you don't get on the other planars. You get the open back planar with an open back. It's got a 12-layer piezo that kind of helps out some upper frequency range, which I'm not sure where it crosses over. And of course the tuning tweak by Hawaii Bad Boy. So who should buy this one? I do think this one is sort of a planar bass fan set who don't really want the negatives of that planar treble and timbre. Like I said, other sets, especially like Timeless, and that's why I don't want to dwell on the graph too much, they do have a lot of planar treble, a lot of planar timbre to them, and this is tuned in a way to not really emphasize that at all. It sounds a lot more natural. And I do think this one is a set for if you prefer bassier music, if your library happens to be similar to Hawaii Bad Boy's library. You like a little R&B, you like a lot of rock that has some really nice bass lines to it. This one is kind of right up your alley because of the bass level. Another really interesting thing about this, and I think probably number 3, maybe the most important thing on the whole sheet, when you're trying to figure out to buy a planar, they all kind of sound planar-ish, and then there's the Hook-X, and why was it probably popular? Why was the OG one a little more popular? Because it follows kind of a similar sound signature to BL03, this bassy, natural, very easygoing, wide appeal sound signature. And I think Aria really took that to the next level. And I will say Aria, that's kind of a proxy for all the sets that have same sound signatures to Aria. Lots of them follow the same frequency response that Aria has. So I think Aria is kind of this group of, BL03 didn't quite have the technicalities, and there's a whole group of sets like even T3 Plus by Tin, Aria, other sets, even Heart Mirror Pro that came along and sort of came really close to that bassier sound, but a little more technical. And then I think HBB's Hook-X version, I think, is just the next logical step for those of you who really like that style of set. This one kind of is going to hit you right in the right spot. So what works on this set? Like I said, it's kind of this relaxed, bassy, easygoing, wide appeal tuning. Very much how I described the BL03. This one's just a lot more technical than BL03. Most likable planar, not trying to sound like a planar. And I've sort of talked about that in the past on different sets, and I haven't really liked too many sets that try to avoid sounding like planar because they tend to overdampen and do some odd things to the tuning, and they don't really sound as natural as they should. This one kind of hits the sweet spot of not really sounding, not giving you a lot of planar timbre, not a lot of treble, tizziness. It's very much more in line with these sets as opposed to the other planars, and I think that really, really works, and I think that's why it was so popular, why it works with certain libraries that other planars are not going to work with. Just a more natural sounding set, but I think there is a trade-off that we'll get to in a bit. So what doesn't work? And I think it's the planar technicalities. I think some of those sets, and even Timeless, that detail and that resolution and that clarity and even the stage, I think a lot of parts of other planars do those things really well, but they sound a lot less natural. So this was a set that sounds a little more natural, but you're not going to get a lot of that detail and resolution and decay. Some of those really micro details that you get on some of those super clear planar sets, because this one has a sound signature that is a little bit different. So I think this treble boosted over that big bass doesn't really volume scale as much as some other of the planars. I think it just sounds a little more V-shaped when you turn it up a little bit. And like I said, this one will transition from kind of this relaxed bassy set to more intense when you go too far on the volume, or even if your tracks have a little less bass. So just looking at this again, I think this elevated level right here, I think that is fine when you have a track that also has this as well. I think these two are in balance. But when you have a track that doesn't really have a whole lot of bass to it, this kind of puffs out of place. And I do think especially when you go a little beyond volume, this one has a very, very defined sweet spot on volume where it sounds really, really good. And if you go just a little bit too far, you start to hear a little bit of this edginess, this lower upper mid treble that's just a little boosted above where Timeless was. And I think that sort of presents itself when this isn't as strong as other tracks. So you're just hearing more of this as opposed to hearing these two in balance. And I think that's really what happens. So value, I think it may not be that best planar showcase, the one that's super resolution. It's not like Stellaris, which has like crazy amount of resolution and detail and planar tweaks to it, but it didn't sound natural at all. I think this one is, not necessarily that kind of showcase, but if you ignore that it's a planar driver and just say, does it sound really good for the price that they're charging? I think this is a very nice sounding set, and I understand exactly, like I said, why people like that sound very much. Very much in line with this widely appealing sound signature. So yeah, I think it's really, as I said, it's just really easy to understand why people like the original, and I think this one is probably just a step more in that direction. So relaxed to a fault. So I said this one is kind of relaxed. It kind of follows this little progression right there. And I think in the treble, I think they probably didn't push it, maybe a little bit too safe, perhaps. There's something there that's not quite, especially for a planar, the stage height is just not as high as it should be for that price. And I think it would have opened up the mids quite a bit. Sounds just a little bit better. And I think the open back contribution, it's not really immediately noticeable because the height's not as high as it should be, but the width is actually very good. So I think this is about the third open back set that I've tried recently, and I don't think any of the three have really hit stage all that well. I'm not sure it's the open back is detracting from the height. They all had kind of that same problem where the height really wasn't as high as it really should be. And it's kind of odd. So I don't know if that's just a trend. That's what happens when you do open backs on some sets. But the width is actually good on this one. But again, it's kind of hard to say that having an open back really contributed to an amazing soundstage. I don't think it does in this case. So what's the sound? Like I said, bassy, relaxed, and it's warm for a planar, which is actually very, very odd. And if you tried a few planars, like you would never say that Timeless is a warm set. It has this kind of coldness, it's kind of this sharp, angular, planar sound to it. And this one is not like that. Again, warm, kind of warm, like those other sets that we were talking about. So turning it up will definitely give you a little more V-shaped, and it looks a little more like the graph, as I said. But when you turn it down a little bit, and you get in the zone, and it kind of sounds like a BL03, like a very fine version of a BL03, and you have a library that resembles Hawaii Bad Boy, yeah, I think it kind of hits its sweet spot right there. So the bass, I think it's definitely my favorite part of this set, and I think planar bass at a proper fun level is just something to be enjoyed, and I think this one does it very, very well. I think it just brings the warmth, and that's something that you don't find on other planars, like I said, and that's why I keep on talking about it, because it should have actually been a differentiator. It should have been part of their marketing, because it does have this very natural warm sound, which you don't find in a lot of planars. So it may not beat the other planars on detail or bass impact or even bass definition, but it sounds more like a nice 1DD set, and that's really hard to do on a planar without having some of the negatives of a planar, like in the treble. So again, kind of a very unique set for me anyway. And carrying through the bass into the mid, so it does bleed through a little bit. It's just not all that typical for a planar, and I think it works here, and it works here very well, again, because it evokes this, BL03 aria type of sound. So very effective in doing that. So the mids, not very planar-like, more natural, warm like a 1DD, like I said, where the other planars have less bleed, they're a little colder sounding, there's more clarity, and that's kind of a big bonus on planar sets. This one is definitely a bit warmer, a lot warmer, a bit less clear, a little less clarity, and that upper mid treble boost a bit just to give you that planarness back into the sound. So it does have a little more bass. So I do think they had to boost that for a reason, and I think it actually worked out. And as I said, when you have a little bassier track, I think when the two are in balance, I think that actually does work out very, very well, and I think that was probably the right move. But this one is an easy transition for V-shaped 1DD owners. Like I said, that natural progression from those sets, very much in line with what Hook-X sounds like. But if you're a more neutral fan and you're looking for those details and the resolution and all those planar technicalities, this one is not quite there. This one will sound just a little bit forced because they boosted it up just to make it a little more apparent. Whereas the other planars, I think it's a more natural, planar sounding resolution and details and speed, transients, all those other things that planars do. I think at some point they transition over to the piezo, and I think they did have to force it just a little bit. So, like I said, this one does go better with bassier tracks, so you have that balance like I talked about. Libraries, more like as HBB always talks about in his reviews. So the treble, I think it does have the extension and generally is fatigue-free. There's some sharp bits when there isn't really enough bass for that balance like I talked about. Less bassy tracks will sound a little bit sharper. For a planar, it's just not the airiest one. Probably could use a little more and move the instruments higher in the stage. I sort of got hung up on the height of the stage quite a bit, and I do think it's something in the treble that, or maybe it's the bass that just tweaked the bass. Something, or it's the open back. There's something there that tweaked the height of the stage into something that sounds a little less than it really should. But it's okay. I mean, maybe it was just a compromise with the piezo. But again, I think it was kind of an odd choice to use a piezo when you hear other sets that can do treble very, very well. I almost think that in retrospect, they probably may have been better off not using the piezo. Maybe there would have been less compromise in the stage presence on this set. Maybe they could have tuned the treble just as well as they did on the piezo. It's very hard to other than it sounding very safe and non-fatiguing, it's really hard to say that this set, because it sounds treble-wise, it's kind of more in line with this as opposed to the other planars. Was that really a good trade-off or not? And I mean, it's design, that is what the design is, so you can't really say too much. But I think in retrospect, and hearing some other sets that came after this one, you know, perhaps they should actually take out the piezo and release a version that's just the planar tuned with planar treble from, you know, bass all the way through treble. I think it's probably a decent driver, and they could probably do a pretty good job on it. So lastly, stage, like I said, it really just needs height to really open it up. It just sounds a little bit too low, a little too central there. Too many tracks collect in the middle, whereas other planars offer kind of a better imaging experience. And it's kind of a big nitpick on this one, but yeah, I do think there's some oddity in the height there, whether that was the open back or the treble or too much bass. Something really cut it down to where it should be a little bit higher. So again, thank you guys for tuning in. That's what I got on Hook-X. So we'll see you next time.